So we all know about the Tata acquisitions, the very famous Tata acquisitions of Jaguar Land Rover, of Chorus Steel, of Tetley Tea, and also partly Airtel recently, in the more recent past, in about 18 months or so I think, of Zain in Africa, mobile telecoms. There have been a lot of deals, and those are perhaps the biggest, most famous ones, but Indian pharmaceutical companies have been expanding out for quite some time into Europe, acquiring outfits in Europe, and it's been fantastic, I think, for India. It's been very exciting. It's been a very lively time for Indians. There's full of optimism. India is full of optimism and confidence about it. Yes, valuation is an issue. The valuation gap is the difference between what a buyer places as the value on what it wants to buy and the seller places as the value as to what it wants to sell. And that is historically a problem, has been a problem. One of the issues that brokers and corporate finance advisors are finding very hard to deal with, which has nothing to do with valuation, is to do with the structure of Indian groups. A lot of them are still very much family-owned, and the family shareholders, the dominant family shareholders, can be senior in age terms, in position terms. And so culturally, the mindset there makes it difficult for them to be comfortable with issuing equity. The situation with the Vodafone case was that Vodafone, obviously offshore, acquired Indian assets through an offshore company. And the Indian tax authorities tried to tax it in relation to those Indian assets. I mean, they were complex structures, but that's the essence of it. And Vodafone appealed, and in January this year, everyone got very excited by the idea that the Supreme Court upheld Vodafone's position, saying you are not subject to tax in India because of that. But now, in the recent budget, the moves seem to be that legislation is going to come into effect to somehow reverse that, so that companies like Vodafone will be subject to tax in India. And that's difficult. Now, we know we're talking about Vodafone going into India, and generally our conversation is about outbound, but globalization is a two-way process, and of course tax matters to everyone. So until somebody, whether in India or outside, can take confidence in the stability and regularity of the tax system, things will continue to be held up. Confidence outside and inside will be affected. Let's imagine the assets are in a particular jurisdiction where moving them from there to where you want them to be will be very costly from a tax perspective. That can be a problem for the company. It may also not be possible to move them because of local law. You may not be able to move them. You may have to find a completely different way of restructuring in order to get the assets into the right place. So that can be a challenge. And the other big challenge is corporate governance. Historically, when the investors are looking into the legal and financial background of the company, if they find aspects of management that they're not necessarily happy with, they may be unwilling to take the plunge and invest in the way that they might otherwise. I have seen that however good a product, however good a company's offering, if investors are somehow put off or not fully comfortable with the idea of the management of the group historically, that can be an issue. Be looking at going into India. The first question that we always ask, we always need an answer to, is can you actually invest in India? India has a very specific regime on foreign direct investment, and overseas investors simply are not allowed into some Indian sectors. So if an overseas company says, I have the following business and I'd like to take it to India, you may simply not be able to. In some cases, you are able to if you meet certain conditions. In some cases, you are able to as long as you tie up with somebody on the ground in India. State law can make a difference. So, for example, some states will offer incentives for international investors. The state of Gujarat, for example, is very keen, Bihar, very keen to attract international investment. Some states might impose prohibitive tariffs. You're taking money from abroad, from wherever, into India, and ultimately, whether in the form of a return of income or capital, you want to get it out. So you need to be clear that your money going in and coming out is as unencumbered as possible by taxes, by tariffs, by customs duties and whatever, to make your investment as worthwhile as possible.